Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. My name is Cal Naranjo. Welcome to episode 141, where on this week's episode of the podcast, I am going to be reviewing The Accountant 2, starring Ben Affleck and Jon Bernthal. As always, there will be a non-spoiler section of the review and a spoiler section of the review, so no need to worry if you did see the film, or if you didn't, there's hopefully a section in the podcast for you. And to round out the end of the episode, I will be responding to listener mail as well as question of the week responses. Let's dive into The Accountant 2 with no electric boogaloo.
I'd like to have someone check in on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, get a dog.
Do you have a dog?
I'm getting a dog. Look at this. Yeah. That's Greg.
Unconvincing.
What do you mean unconvincing? That's Greg. I'm getting this dog.
No, you like the idea of a dog.
Anybody who has a dog likes the idea of getting a dog. That's why they got the dog in the first place.
Do you have a permanent residence?
No,
Anyone to care for your dog during long absences?
I do not.
Do you keep a regular schedule in terms
No,
of eating, sleeping?
I don't.
You're a cat person. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, you know something? If I had a cat, at least the cat would miss me.
Doubtful. Possible.
This is a really interesting movie to discuss. The Accountant 1 was a very mild success, a budget of $44 million with a box office of 155, directed by Gavin O'Connor, who's made a number of movies, most famously, probably in my opinion, would be Warrior and The Way Back, which was a really excellent film. And clearly, he hit it off with Ben Affleck because they've now made 3 movies in a row together. But it's funny, Hollywood is in such an interesting place in general, where there have been so many complaints from average, not saying average, but general film-going audiences demanding original things. But at the same time, the industry has also been supported by the fact that sequels, remakes, and reboots, for the most part, obviously there's some outliers, have still been successful. And a 9-year sequel to The Accountant definitely was not on my bingo card. And from a spoiler standpoint, there's not a ton to actually talk about. I mean, obviously there's what happens in the movie, but what's so interesting to me about The Accountant 2, and I had friends and family asking me over the weekend what I thought about this movie, and similar to the first one, which was a lot of the selling point was Ben Affleck playing somebody who has autism, who clearly has an incredible mind when it comes to strategy and mathematical analysis, that being why he's an accountant, able to put numbers together, see patterns, and evaluate situations, and put all those things together and solve cases, which is why he's worked independently on his own, doing all sorts of different things. And the discovery of his existence in the first film, and the mystery that surrounded him the whole time. And this movie is more of that, which is anything you really liked for the most part from the first one is there. And the way that I describe these movies to people is funny because there is a lot of expectations, specifically going into the theater now, that you want the absolute spectacle. You want the justification to go to the theater. Not to say that I think this is necessarily the right mindset. There are a lot of smaller movies that used to be successful on the big screen, but so much of streaming has affected mid and lower budget movies. Unless you're a horror film, which is usually a substantially lower budget, those are obviously wildly successful. They specifically come out during specific points of the year. And The Accountant 2 is one of those movies that if I was a kid in a movie rental store, specifically a Blockbuster, which was a much more widespread store chain, or Jumbo Video, which was a very local reference, this was the kind of movie trailer you would see on the TV. You would see the poster, which is Jon Bernthal, Ben Affleck. They've both got some sort of machine gun. I'm not a gun guy. They're wearing their tactical vests looking at each other. Big standee. And I would go, Dad, can we get The Accountant 2? And he would probably say yes. And then we would watch it on the weekend. And the whole time we would be going, yeah, the whole movie. And that's kind of what The Accountant 2 does. It's a fun movie with a very 90s-esque mystery that is just a fun time. It looks good. It's got two compelling leads. The selling point for The Accountant 2 is the back and forth between Ben Affleck and Jon Bernthal. I think Ben Affleck clearly put in the work when establishing and creating who Christian Wolf is, how his autism is presented to those around him, how it affects all of his social interactions, as well as his awareness with everybody. And I like that there is that. It's not pushing into the realm of like the more recent Predator movie, which made autism a superpower. It's autism as a spectrum has so many different aspects to the diagnosis. And for this one specific perspective, I haven't looked in to see how the community at large has responded to the films, but clearly it was positive enough that they decided to go back and make another one. The movie cost $80 million compared to that of the 44 of the original. So that feels like it's just 9 years later inflation, as opposed to let's spend 100 to 120 million on this movie. So these movies are really difficult to talk about because they're fun to watch, and I had a good time with this. And I think if this is your first time listening to a Film Realist review, a lot of my goal in this is to watch the movie, see what the movie is trying to present, what are the goals it is trying to achieve. Is it specifically trying to be its own kind of movie? Are we trying to fit in with a specific genre? Is it checking off the list that it would be conceived of and then created for? That's a long-winded way of saying, is this a B-level action movie? Yeah. Is it funny? Yeah. Does it have compelling action? Sort of. I found it really interesting that specifically a lot of this definitely feels like it's more in that lower budget range. It doesn't feel as if it's made without any money, where we're of course not approaching independent looking. But movies like this, there used to be a substantially larger amount of them. And it's an interesting point the industry is right now, where we are just getting a very rare occasional one of these. Typically, going back to The Amateur, which was a review a couple weeks ago, a lot of these movies nowadays would be getting moved to streaming. But because this is an Amazon MGM Studios film, which was also produced by Artists Equity, which is Matt Damon and Ben Affleck's production studio, who worked on movies like what was Air, more specifically, and then some other films along throughout the last couple years. This is a movie made for the theater, which I suspect will definitely succeed on Amazon Prime Video when it hits that. When it does, I'm not necessarily sure. It'll be interesting because this definitely had an okay box office weekend. It was awesome, and I saw this today that there were at least 3 movies that opened domestically that all made, it's 4 movies, all made over $20 million. And outside of Revenge of the Sith, which was a re-release, of course, but The Accountant 2, Sinners, and Minecraft, I don't want to fall down the rabbit hole of what I thought about that film, were all successful. And that is a positive to see the diversity of what was available at the theater still was able to pull in a wide range of audiences, which I really appreciate. So I know I talked a lot about a bunch of different things with this non-spoiler section of the review, but that's kind of what The Accountant 2 is. It is such a specific yet generic aspect of what the theatrical going experience used to be like. And I'm glad that this movie does exist, that there is an opportunity to go and see something like this on the big screen. It's fun. I was entertained by it. It's got good performances by characters and actors that really do have great chemistry. And that's the selling point. It's oorah and it's fun. Does that mean it's super memorable? Probably not. But it's funny enough that we already have 2 movies in this universe. And if it's successful again, the likelihood is we'll get a third. But I will say, if there is an Accountant 3, I will definitely be going into the theater to see it. So That's my non-spoiler thoughts on The Accountant 2. And then I guess spoilers might be even shorter than this, but I can get into what I thought about the plot and what fun I did have with the specific action sequences. So let's jump into spoilers now.
I coughed loudly twice. No, please don't do that.
You're Christian Wolf.
You're Mary Beth Medina. Do I make you nervous?
You're an escaped convict, trained by mob accountants. Your clients are drug cartels, money launderers, third world warlords.
Is that a yes?
So The Accountant 2 starts off with Ray, who was played by J.K. Simmons in the first film, where he's trying to unravel the missing persons case. And it's super funny to me that this sort of has a face-off element, which is that the missing person and the assassin he hires to find the missing person, and we're in spoilers, winds up being the same person, which is super funny. A movie that is in 2025 having elements similar to that of Face Off, except in this instance, and the irony is, of course, Ben Affleck is best friends with Matt Damon playing Jason Bourne, the trained Treadstone agent who had lost all of his memory. And in this instance, we have an assassin who was just a regular person who was in an accident, lost all her memory, and became an assassin. That's kind of the main twist of the whole movie, but there is a missing child. This woman had lost her son at some point, who was taken from her in the midst of a human trafficking outlet that's working out of, I believe it's supposed to be a port in Los Angeles. And one of the financial crimes enforcement network, who was she played by? Cynthia Adai Robinson, who is a new character that was not in the original, winds up involved in this case because Ray Wrights find the accountant after being murdered, thus starting the breadcrumbs of building into the mystery. And the mystery is not really the most surprising part of the movie. It's kind of the foundation that holds up the rest of the movie. The main part is Christian Wolf, the accountant, having to deal with other people when trying to find these missing persons. Him having the belief based on things he's seen with the lost child that he could be somebody like him. He went to a school that was for the gifted, and it's turned into essentially like their own secret organization, an element that was a part of the first film. And I do have to say, having only seen the first film once, I'm glad there was some, not even catch up, but a recap of some of the elements of the first film. Again, this is not one of those action movies that I've revisited multiple times. I saw The Accountant in theaters, and I never watched it ever again. So the continuation to be the death of a character from the first film, I'm sure that holds a lot of weight for those who remember the first film well, but I didn't and don't. So his death was sad because I love J.K. Simmons, but that being the momentum, and specifically with Christian Wolf and him being autistic, we don't see the kind of loss that you would get typically from another action genre because of what the lead is on the autistic spectrum. That's probably a really confounding way of saying, like, the tragedy and the loss because of a very minimal, if no emotional relationship between Christian and Raymond. The momentum is the mystery and the kid involved. That's what Christian wants to do. And the dynamic of him and his brother Braxton, played by John Bernthal, going back and forth with Mary Beth in how to do things, because the two of them work outside of the law and, of course, are breaking the law to do the right thing, which is, again, when you're following the protagonists who are doing things illegally because they're doing them for the quote-unquote right reasons, you follow along with them. And as I said in the non-spoiler section of the review, the back and forth between John Bernthal and Ben Affleck is absolutely incredible, specifically with a relationship with somebody on the spectrum and Braxton not having the emotional wherewithal to really connect and trying to connect to Christian on a social, emotional level, asking if he was missed, trying to see what he wants out of the relationship. And of course, because of their different relationships with social, emotional relationships, they view it very differently. And it's fun to see the back and forth between the two of them. And Jon Bernthal and Ben Affleck talked about a scene that is in the movie where Christian learns to line dance while they are in a country bar, well on the road to trying to find these missing kids. That's a super fun scene, and getting to see Christian evaluate a physical situation as opposed to something binary with numbers. But at the same time, there is a rhythm to line dancing, and him slowly starting to put the pieces together make for a lot of fun. And Braxton always wanting to get into trouble in a bar fight, and that being a connecting thing with them. And the continuation of their dynamic from the first film, specifically with Christian slowly starting to see where Braxton is coming from and approach the relationship and telling him he's grateful that he's there, giving him little pieces of appreciation, whether that be with communication, no physicality, of course, is meaningful, because regardless of if he feels it within himself, he knows that it does matter to Braxton, and the brotherly relationship is very fun. And it happens when you get Jon Bernthal is an actor who has an incredible range, but clearly in the sweet spot of being somebody you kind of love to hate. He does so perfectly. We saw it with the Punisher in Daredevil and the Punisher and Daredevil Born Again very recently. But to continue that sort of trend in The Accountant 2 is wildly fun, and I like that. Again, this movie's action is all right. It's not John Wick. The choreography is fairly tactile and believable because you have people doing things that are not crazy and outside the realm of believability. And my favorite part of the movie is the climactic action sequence. Really did remind me of my days of playing Call of Duty Warzone, where you'd wind up in the final circle and it's two teammates versus 4 as Verdansk is closing in and the gas is approaching. And sometimes you get the W and sometimes you don't. I wish Warzone 2 was as good as Warzone 1, but here we are now in 2025 and they're finally bringing back Verdansk. So the movie's fun. Again, this is something I enjoyed. It is not overly complicated. The simplicity is what works about this movie. Ben Affleck and Jon Bernthal and everybody else in the film are not phoning in their performances. They're dialed in on what works about these movies. They're fun, they're enjoyable. The characters have their own specific point of views. We understand them because there is simplicity, and it's an entertaining movie. It's worth it seeing on the big screen for some, but I know that the minute this hits streaming, I'm going to be telling more and more people it'll be on Prime Video because that's where it's going to go, it being produced by Amazon MGM Studios, that this is a movie you should watch. And it's one that is not a movie you should skip. But again, if I was in a Blockbuster or any digital rental and I saw the poster for this as a kid, 10, preteen, whatever, I'd be like, I want that movie. Have I seen The Accountant 1? Maybe I haven't, maybe not. But I definitely would watch The Accountant 2. The fact that it did well enough in its opening weekend shows that people were looking forward to seeing this. Ben Affleck as a bankable star is a really interesting thing to be approaching right now, specifically with Jon Bernthal being in so many things recently. I'd be really curious what brought people into the theater. But this being a sequel was not what brought me into the theater. It was the movie I had time to see this weekend. I really want to make time to go see The Legend of Ochi. I didn't have time for that, but I'm definitely going to see it. So make sure you're following on your podcast platform, preferred thread, because I'll eventually mention that movie. Even if it's not in a full review, I'm definitely going to see it because I think it looks absolutely adorable. So that will do it for my The Accountant 2 review. It's a fun B-action movie with 2 compelling leads. I think that's a big enough sell on its own. So let's jump into question of the week and listener mail.
Can I ask you a question? Just fun?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Last week's question of the week was, what is your favorite Ben Affleck film? Let's check the comments to see what people had to say. Scotty Cameron writes in, my favorite Ben Affleck movie is The Town. It's a great crime drama, and I loved it made people take Ben Affleck seriously as an actor again. It's funny because The Town is both my favorite movie starring Ben Affleck and my favorite movie directed by Ben Affleck. It's a shame that the behind-the-scenes chaos at DC under Jeff Johns and John Berg, and then later Walter Hamada and Toby Emmerich resulted in Ben Affleck's Batman movie getting canned. The Town is evidence he would have made a great Batman movie. There is so much to say about that, Scotty, but maybe when the next the Batman or the next Batman movie comes out, God, I hope it's the Batman Part 2, we can have a conversation about that. Stephanie writes in, I'm going to go with the obvious and least controversial answer of Good Will Hunting, but I won't lie and say I don't enjoy him in Gone Girl or Pearl Harbor. Oh no. A yearly ritual with my husband. Oh, Stephanie, I know your husband. And why? Why are you revisiting this every single year? You have to tell me. I guess I'm not really a big fan of him as an actor. He just seems to be very self-important. In quotes, shrugs. Okay, understandable. I mean, I think Gone Girl is brilliant. It's got one of my favorite Neil Patrick Harris performances. And David Fincher absolutely crushed that book. Dylan writes in, Dylan Pollock of Movies to Watch Before You Die. Hello, Dylan. I'm going to do a variety of genres for Ben Affleck. Okay. For drama, it's Argo. For comedy, it's Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. And for thriller, it's Gone Girl. Okay, here we go. Having finally seen The Accountant in the past week, I was disappointed it wasn't more relatable. He didn't use Excel even once. That's the thing, Dylan. He doesn't have to. All right. And what has become my favorite weekly tradition of recording the Film Realist podcast, Scotty Cameron's YouTube novel. Here we go. I know I already answered the question on Spotify, it's The Town. However, I do want to give the first Accountant film a shout out, okay? Because it is a neat action film. And Affleck does come off as someone on the autistic spectrum whose cases affect his social skills and his aim. There's a reason all of his guns have scopes and laser pointers. It also helps him memorize numbers and makes him a highly skilled mathematician. I do like the revelation that the marketing for the sequel spoils John Bernthal as Ben Affleck's brother in the film. Yes, the John Clark and Jack Ryan book. Okay, so that's separate. Here's our next part. Yes, the John Clark and Jack Ryan books are part of the same shared universe called the Ryanverse, which I believe also included Op Center, another Tom Clancy novel series. I have never heard of that one. So it would be cool if Skydance goes all in on the Ryanverse lore and has Michael B. Jordan's Clark meet John Krasinski's Jack Ryan. I would love that. The final season of Jack Ryan introduced Michael Peña's Domingo Chavez, who is a member of Rainbow Six. I know that because I did play some of those games, which is John Clark's counterterrorism unit. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. Funny thing is Michael B. Jordan wanted the sequel to Without Morse to be an adaptation of Rainbow Six novel with elements of Rainbow Six video games in the mix. That seems to be put on ice after Without Remorse failed. Funny that Rainbow Six is part of two different shared universes connected to Tom Clancy because there are the Ryanverse films and novels. Then there's Ubisoft Tom Clancy Games, which started with a video game adaptation of Rainbow Six before branching out with Splinter Cell and Ghost Recon. Okay. And then we've got the third part, fair enough, about the Netflix shows being tangentially set in the MCU because the Netflix shows would reflect on the events that happened in the movies. However, the movies did not reference anything that happened in the Netflix shows. However, that can be easily chalked up to the level of stakes, with the movies having much greater stakes on the shows. Alien invasions are more cataclysmic threats than gang wars. With MCU Disney shows, those all have greater stakes than the MCU Netflix shows. I mean, Loki sets up much of the multiverse conflict that's dominating the current phase of the MCU films. My point about Muse is that if he wasn't killed off, spoilers, we could have had him break out of prison in a later season and be the thorn in Daredevil's side again for an episode or two before Daredevil sends him back to prison. I guess other Daredevil villains could get that treatment like Mr. Fear. And to round out the thing, I definitely think Marvel Studios should keep Ryan Coogler in the loop for films beyond the Black Panther trilogy, given that he's made great movies outside of Marvel. Heck, give him the Mahershala Ali Blade film since he directed a vampire movie with Sinners. That's all, folks. Stay yoppy. Scotty Cameron, you're absolutely right. What I find specifically interesting is, of course, Sinners and Blade, the correlation being vampires, biggest statement actually is, if I'm Disney or whatever studio they want to have within there, I find it incredibly shocking because obviously Disney has such a specific avenue for what they're going to be making movies with. But with 20th Century Studios being under the Disney banner, I'm shocked that given all the success that Ryan Coogler has had with them with Black Panther, that it wasn't made there. He put it out to the highest bidder. And I mean, I'm glad Warner Brothers bought it because that is a studio that I want to stay independent from the other two studios that really are making any movies whatsoever. I know you can argue that there's more, but that's not really the point. So I think that's funny about the Blade comparison, but that seems to be in the minutia of Marvel movies that were announced before they were ready. And given the fact that comic book movies in general, I've gotten really tired of announcements that lead to nothing. That has been my biggest negative reaction to movie publicity more recently than anything. Obviously, the Marvel Cinematic Universe's success with the Infinity Saga was slightly accidental because we know, if you go back through the archive, of how Iron Man was made, but eventually they did get really cohesive scripts. I was talking all weekend about how The Winter Soldier, the Captain America sequel, is still the best Marvel movie of all time, with the tightest script and some of the best stunts and directing in the whole universe. But Ryan Coogler as an original concept director is something I don't want to get rid of. So whatever he wants to make next, that's the thing I'm most looking forward to. Of course, Black Panther 3 is going to be amazing. I think Wakanda Forever is the best Marvel movie in that tier. I want to say I put it in S when I did my Marvel ranking. I've done quite a few of those. I'm going to have to check real quick. Yeah, I did. I put that in S because it was easily the best movie of that whole run. And Sinners just establishes that when this guy can make a movie completely on his own with his own original ideas, with his best actor he's had with him, it's an incredible dynamic, and it's something I hope they continue to do. Exploring different time periods is also kind of something I'd be curious about him doing. We've seen so many of his films be in the modern era, and then Sinners being set in the 1930s really separates it from all the other films he's made. Blade is a movie for me that actually kind of makes no sense outside of what's going on in the multiverse saga, especially because we know there's going to be some sort of reboot that's happening later where we can then tell smaller stakes stories. One of the biggest problems with the multiversal saga is it has seemed inconsistent in how it has been affecting all the other stuff around it, that the connectivity has been loose at best. Look, it's a common misconception that all the post-credit scenes are going to matter. And looking at phase 4 and 5, going into phase 6, how few of those have. Captain America Brave New World seems to have really the only one so far that's going to really connect to anything. I mean, is it possible that the post-credit scene from the Marvels connects to Avengers Doomsday? Who knows? But I attended a press conference today, and it was announced that Avengers Doomsday starts shooting Monday, day that this episode comes out. So that movie comes out in just over a year. So fingers crossed they manage to land this plane, because I would be super sad if the multiversal saga ended on a whimper. So that would be disappointing. But I love Ryan Coogler. I want him to maybe make Creed 4 if he wants to, because some of those Creed movies are probably some of the best Rocky movies of all time. Wow. I had my own novel there for you, Scotty. Answer all of those things that I said. Love you, buddy. And I appreciate each and every one of the listeners or not listeners who wants to answer the question of the week. So we know, given the massive announcement for Avengers Doomsday, all the cast members who have been announced, and therefore what Thunderbolts will likely survive or be seen in flashback. I don't really think it spoils the movie, but by the time you're listening to this, potentially I have seen Thunderbolts already. So connecting it to that, I'm curious, what cast member from the Marvel Cinematic Universe that hasn't been announced for Avengers Doomsday are you hoping shows up in that movie? So to answer the question of the week, you can comment directly below on Spotify and YouTube, or you can email the podcast, filmreelistspod@gmail.com. Or you can @filmreelist on any of the social media platforms. I am on all of them. Just make sure to include the hashtag QOTW. as I said, with Question of the Week, which is always inspired by what is coming up next week. Next week's episode of the podcast will be a review of Thunderbolts Asterisk. What's the real title? Probably revealed at the end, but I'm really looking forward to seeing Marvel's ragtag of anti-heroes taking on an unknown villain. It looks amazing. I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope you are with me next week for my review of Thunderbolts. My name is Kal Naranya, and I will see you